Welcome to Live the Dream with yours truly, Marty Kaiser. Buckle up and let's get started. This is Marty Kaiser with another episode of my Real Estate Tidbits podcast, where we help you make your dreams come true. I do apologize that we didn't put a new podcast on last Friday. Believe it or not, I had gone on a family trip and got back, and lo and behold, I had COVID. So I was kind of out of pocket last week. Wasn't too bad. I took some medicine and it seemed to get rid of it quicker. My only advice for people is, as you probably have been reading, COVID cases are a lot more prevalent now than they were previously. So be as careful as you can. We went on a cruise, and of course, in a cruise, you got thousands of people, and no matter how many precautions you make, unless you wear a mask all the time, you're kind of like rolling the dice. I will probably think long and hard prior to my next cruise in terms of how COVID is and such, but that's on me. But anyway, I'm up and running today, so I'm back at it. I wanted to, we're going to do a two-part series to make up for last week. We're going to do a podcast today, and then we're going to do one tomorrow. These podcasts are going to kind of blend together, and I'm going to kind of combine the two so that neither of them are quite as long as our normal one, but hopefully they'll have a good flow. And kind of my theme, besides updating you on real estate, is how real estate and life somewhat blend together, and how things that you might not expect to affect real estate will affect real estate and vice versa. Regarding some real estate data, a couple things I thought you'd be interested in. The Fed is meeting in the next week, actually probably a little less than that. It is rumored that they will have a rate reduction of somewhere between 0.25 and 0.50 basis points. What does that mean exactly? Well, that means the lending rate that the Fed lends to banks is going to go down. Typically, that has a beneficial effect on interest rates in general. It doesn't always immediately correlate to mortgage rates, but hopefully this will reduce mortgage rates in the upcoming future a little bit. Rates have come down a little bit, as I mentioned in my last podcast. And now, for the most part, someone with good, solid credit looking for a fixed-rate mortgage. On a national level, the average rate was about 6 1/4. That varies depending on market, and you have to look at other variables like upfront expenses and things. But that's a good sign. Along with that, it's expected, based on everybody's prognostications, that the Fed is going to meet 4 or 5 times in 2025, with the expectation that most of those meetings, if not all, may result in some type of rate adjustment downward. The inflation rate in August was below 3%, so that was a great sign. And it seems like inflation is getting increasingly under control. I know sometimes it doesn't seem that way if you go to the grocery store and maybe you look at the cost of meat or the cost of eggs, whatever the case, and you say, well, you know, under 3% is nothing, but my food bill seems to be a lot more than that. And probably in some cases it is. And I'm not an economist, and I'm not a food provider or a purveyor, but it seems to me as a consumer, and also in the real estate business where we rely quite a bit on interest rates, that there's been some type of, for lack of a better term, legalized price gouging. What do I mean by that? Well, I think some of the suppliers have used inflation and the supply chain issues we had a few years ago. When they raised their prices, they've kept the prices high as opposed to lowering them where they should be. So I believe that some of these providers of food products have increased their profit margin at the expense of consumers. So I know there's talk that the government is going to look into this. We'll see if that happens or not. But I really feel that there's no reason for some of these prices to have maintained their high level. When I started this particular podcast, I mentioned that I was going to correlate some non-real estate things that affect us in life and how they're related to real estate and vice versa. So what I mean by that is, as you probably know if you've listened to my podcast, I'm a big sports fan. So I try to stay up on sports. I'm a big fan. And I also try to look at societal relationships regarding sports. And a couple things that I've noticed recently is, and they're kind of similar, but they're contrasting. This past Sunday, for example, for those of you that are NFL football fans, a prominent receiver for the Miami Dolphins, Tyreek Hill, was just outside the stadium in Miami getting ready to enter it and go to the ball game. They had their opening game on Sunday, and they played against Jacksonville at Miami. And he was there, from all reports and such, about 3 hours before the game. Well, he evidently had some type of traffic violation right near the stadium. They've never really exactly defined what that is, whether he was speeding, whether it was careless driving, or whatever the case. So he was pulled over, and it just so happened that the the policeman's video equipment was on, so it recorded this interaction between Tyreek and the police officers of Miami-Dade County. And anyway, long story short, he probably had a little bit of an attitude when he got pulled over, whether because he was focusing on the game or maybe because he's a high-paid athlete. Sometimes they expect to be treated a little bit better than the average citizen, or whatever the case may be. So what was shown on video, he had a little bit of an attitude and was a little bit reluctant to put his window and keep it down the way the police had instructed him to. So what ended up happening during some of the verbal commands that he didn't follow to the police's satisfaction, he was ultimately yanked out of the car, put face down on the pavement, and put in handcuffs. And this was all shown on video. And it seemed like, even though he wasn't the most cooperative person that was getting a traffic violation, he wasn't a threatening individual, and it seemed like he was very harshly treated. And of course, he has an attorney that's involved now. The Policemen's Benevolent Association in Miami has their own legal group representing the policemen involved. But basically, they've asked for the policeman to be dismissed. And the only thing I can say, and I wasn't there, but I've listened to firsthand reports and I've seen the video, it seemed like his extreme treatment in terms of they didn't need to go to this type of aggressive, more physical proposal, so to speak, with this individual. You know, you can speculate on why you think the reasons are for this, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of scuttlebutt that there hasn't been already on X about this, and everybody has their own opinion. But it's another example where sometimes law enforcement overreaches. On the flip side, when you're stopped for a violation of something, it makes a lot more sense to follow the officer's instructions. Unfortunately, these things seem to be a lot more combustible, and it's unfortunate for all concerned. So the reason that I mention that is because sometimes, like in sporting events, you tend to hear a lot of rhetoric. This past week in the NFL, we had people getting right down to the last second. They didn't have their contract signed. There was all types of drama and intrigue about that. and again, a lot of speculation. We seem in our society to thrive on speculation, social media information, which not all the time is correct. And it seems like a lot of things that go on in our day-to-day existence could be a lot more simplified if people tried to get along and not make headlines and cause a lot of problems. Oh, how does that relate to real estate? Well, as I've mentioned previously, we've got all these new procedures in real estate about how buyers are represented, what type of paperwork buyers need to sign prior to viewing properties, how are agents representing buyers compensated, what options do sellers have. And it's been a transition, and unfortunately, not everyone handles these issues the same way, and some people are a lot more professional and smoother about explaining this and a lot less confrontational. Other folks, unfortunately, take the opposite approach and either are not explaining it properly, don't really give informative answers, tend to be a lot more negative when compensation is discussed. And the long and short of that is that you have to make the best of change. We always have change in life. Real estate's had a lot of change during my career in real estate, especially the last 20 years. We've had peaks and valleys. We've had a lot of technology updates, of course. As we're experiencing now, we're having a lot of changes from a legal perspective. But in any event, as a purveyor in real estate or as a consumer in real estate, if you're going to partake in real estate, you have to adjust to these changes. And so it puts more of a premium on effective communication, on what I call simplified communication, on what I refer to as non-confrontational communication. But the long and short of it is everybody needs to be better educated and take the glass is half full approach to the glass is half empty. Another issue that kind of correlates to day-to-day life, and again it comes with sports, is a lot of you may have heard of Caitlin Clark. She's a rookie phenom in the WNBA, which is the Women's Basketball Association. The Women's Basketball Association has been around for probably 25 or 30 years, and they've basically been funded by the NBA, which is the National Basketball Association that you're more familiar with, where Michael Jordan and LeBron James and folks of their skill level have played. And the thought behind the NBA's involvement was to come up with another event for folks to watch and to grow the women's game. And the women's game gradually grew, but it grew kind of at a moderate pace and certainly didn't have the widespread viewership. The salaries were just a fraction of what the men's game got. And it was just a little different. They've been making slow but steady progress, but probably not to the players' satisfaction. And that's why a lot of players had to take jobs in the offseason, like when Brittany Griner played in Russia and ended up getting arrested there. A lot of players played overseas because they just weren't being compensated adequately in the United States. So what's happened over the past 6 to 12 months especially is Caitlin Clark, who broke most, if not all, of the records in women's basketball, just became a household name overnight and increased the women's basketball league's notoriety, interest, social media posting, viewership, crowds by a phenomenal amount. It's just unparalleled. She's a rookie for the Indiana Fever, who were one of the worst teams in the league for the past several years. And since she's been there, they've improved to where they're about at a 500 level, meaning they're winning as much as they're losing. But more importantly, all her games sell out, which is unheard of. I mean, they're by far leading the league in attendance. When she plays on TV, they get many more eyeballs on the game. So it's great for the game because it exposes all these tremendous female players, and people see that they play a very interesting brand of basketball. And she's kind of like, if I had to give you an analogy to a male player, she's kind of like the Steph Curry of men's basketball. She just has phenomenal shooting range, tremendous passer, and conducts herself at all time in a very classy manner. So I quite enjoy watching her. Well, the reason that there's been so much controversy about her is a lot of her competitors have been not giving her credit and have tried to diminish her accomplishments. And it's really been counterproductive because it puts the people that are criticizing her, in my opinion, in a jealous, negative light. And they're not taking full advantage of her notoriety, which is helping to grow the game. There was also controversy about her exclusion from the Olympic team. I'm not here to give an opinion on that. I just felt that a lot of the negative commentary has just been disappointing. And I mention that because it's another issue of creating controversy when there didn't need to be any controversy. This should have been a tremendous event. And unfortunately, it's clouded by controversy. Some of the premium commentators that have podcasts have spoken up and defended Caitlin Clark in the sense that they've been very disappointed by all this controversy. And then they've been attacked by some of the more well-known people on the Women's Basketball Association that have been the ones that have had less than positive comments about her. And it's just another commentary on our society that we have so much adversarial relationships going on. Instead of looking at the great things that are going on, everybody's looking for controversy, and I just don't really understand that. When it comes to real estate, we need to put more emphasis on not only making it a smooth process, but how can we help make real estate ownership more attainable for people? As prices have gotten a lot higher nationally, we need to continue to try to come up with methodology that makes it easier for people to own a home. I think owning a home is the fabric of our society. It helps the family units. It creates stability for folks. And I just think it's so important. And part of the new real estate policies have made it, in the short term at least, potentially more difficult because there's the potential for compensating buyers' agents that this money may have to come from buyers. And so if that happens in those occasions, that's going to limit the buyer's opportunities because many first-time buyers cannot afford to pay that. Hopefully, most sellers will still be amenable to compensating buyers' agents, but for those sellers that are not, it's going to limit opportunities for buyers. And in my opinion, that's just counterproductive for everybody in our society. Not only real estate agents, but consumers, even sellers, because you want to have a wider pool of folks looking at your real estate. The more eyeballs you get on your property, the more in demand your property is going to be, and ultimately you're going to get a better price for the property. So these things in one fashion or another are all related. They may sometimes not seem that at first glance, but they truly are. So these were just some observations I wanted to make. I'm trying to include in our podcast things that go beyond real estate, that affect society, that affect interpersonal relationships, that affect our relationship with law enforcement, putting greater responsibility, and also we should demand more of people that are our elected officials. We all tend to focus in on the presidential elections, but really and truly your local officials have a lot more effect on your day-to-day life as the president does. For example, in Orlando and Orange County, you may or may not have read an article this past week, but there's some irregularities going on with the state attorney's position. It appears that behind the scenes there's just been some less than ideal circumstances. The election itself is facing right now a Democratic person versus an independent person. The independent person previously used to be a Republican, went independent, was appointed by Governor DeSantis to replace the Democrat who's running for office now. And I won't get into a political discussion of whether that was a correct or legal thing to do, but it was done. So then they had the primary to run against these folks. In the Republican side, they had two persons that were running for the primary, and one person won. And then within 1 week after that election, the Republican candidate dropped out. And from a lot of accounts, including the Orlando Sentinels, it appears that this was a planned strategy because the feeling was that if the Republican ran and the independent who used to be a Republican, they would somehow split the vote and the Democratic candidate would win, especially given the fact that Orange County has more Democratic voters than Republicans. That, to me, is just not the way our political system is supposed to run. If they wanted to have a fair and level election, then they should have had the independent person run as a Republican, since the independent person was a Republican previously, and by all accounts, simply switched affiliations because he didn't feel if he ran as a Republican, he would beat the Democrat. And that's just not the way our democracy is predicated. And we've got other instances of this throughout the United States. There's some potential irregularities going on now in Georgia with a group of folks who would be the ones that actually certify the election. I'm not going to bore you with that because I'm not here to go on a political diatribe. It's just disappointing that we have a lot of things potentially going on that are not in the following the will of the people. A fair and open democratic election is supposed to elect who the majority of people vote for. And when that's not happening, we're getting more and more autocratic or dishonest looks. I certainly don't want to live in an autocratic society. Look what's going on in Venezuela, all the things going on where they feel that the dictator there dramatically lost, but that the way the votes were counted was simply doctored. So these are things that I would love people to get informed about because I think they're important. And it's not a question of what side of the political spectrum you're on. It's that you should be on the right side, meaning that we should have fair and open elections. And the way we conduct ourselves should be based on fact and not wild rumors or innuendo or just made-up information. Well, anyway, that's all for today. I hope everyone is doing well. Stay safe, don't get COVID, and we'll see you tomorrow. Marty Kaiser, out.